good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our listeners all over the world. I am here today with Steffen, CEO of Dreamdata. Quite excited to have him on. His team actually reached out to me asking if he could be on, which I love that. So if you're a listener and if you've ever wanted to be on the RevAmp podcast, you should definitely reach out to be part of it. I think it's cool when our community becomes also like guest on the show. So Steffen is the CEO of Dreamdata, as I just mentioned. Steffen, can you tell me a bit more about yourself and what Dreamdata is?
Yeah, I'm really happy to, and thanks for accepting the pitch, Barry. So I'm actually, I used to be the CRO, which is Chief Revenue Officer. But as of this year, I actually switched to just Chief Marketing Officer. So because we've hired our first real, you can say, sales leader now at Dreamdata. So I'm a marketing leader, a B2B marketing leader by background. I've been doing that for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years now nowadays. So I've always been in B2B and always been in somewhat growth-related roles. More and more, as time goes and you get smarter, you grow into leadership positions. But like the long story short is that in my last company, we were selling to schools and businesses, and we were trying to grow really rapidly, and ran into a ton of attribution pains because we want to grow super fast, but we also didn't want to waste our money. And initially, I just put in 10,000 euros in ad spend. You have a pretty good idea about what comes out of it, but when you cross 100,000 euros per month in ad spend, you don't really have the best of idea of where's the last 10,000 euros going. So I got really into all this attribution stuff without really finding any proper solution. But at the end of my last tenure, I met my two co-founders who, had a very ugly, but actually very valuable alpha version of the product, which is now Dreamdata, which is what we call a B2B revenue attribution platform. And what that means is basically that we, on behalf of our customers, we build a data warehouse that contains every single touch that you have available for any account. And we plot all of these touches into a timeline. So you can see kind of what was the first touch from this account, what was the last touch, how many stakeholders was involved, how many sessions did we have with them, and so forth. Curious people would then use this information to find out what are the repeatable patterns in our customer journeys. Are the stuff that is never ending with us making money? Is this something we should just stop right now, and so forth? Basically, I'm just interested in this whole attribution, whole customer journey thing because I want to win. So I want to understand as much as I can about every customer journey.
Cool. That's awesome. I can definitely relate on the attribution pain points. That's something that, as a marketer, I've experienced at multiple companies. From two fronts. One, the attribution to understand where we're spending money, what's the most important way, but also to make sure that to project and to make the C-suite executive team happy also with our spend, not just for us, even if we're confident about it, but also for the C-suite that isn't day-to-day marketing. So for today's podcast, I think we're going to discuss two topics. One is revenue attribution, which is your bread and butter, but two, something that I'm sure is connected to it, and this is where I want to start, about mapping the customer journey towards revenue. This is interesting for multiple reasons to me, and I'm sure multiple reasons to you and to our audience. But for me, it's interesting because customer journey is so different at every company. It's so, even companies that do the same thing just have a little difference in them. It changes everything. And I'm curious to understand how to map the customer journey, why to map the customer journey, and when I guess people should be mapping the customer journey. So let's start. I guess we could start with the why. I always start with the why. Why do you need to map the customer journey?
I think when we talk B2B, you have to acknowledge that it's a different game than B2C. There's a lot more touches. It's a lot longer. There's a lot more people involved in the journey. And that's just a pain for us if we speak particularly about marketers, because we're typically the first part of the journey and not the last part, which is typically handled by sales because they're the ones closing the deals. But that contains that problem that all of the activities that we're involved in is not that transparent with what is good and what is bad. And what I mean in my world, when I say good or bad, that means that activities that end up producing pipeline and ideally deals as well. So the reason why you want to map the whole journey is to find activities that are repeatable and preferably scalable as well, meaning that if I do these things, they end up becoming sales qualified opportunities, and they end up becoming deals that we actually win. And then you could also have another bucket of things that you do that never ever produces any revenue. So you probably should question why you want to keep doing those things. So for me, it's never about finding something that is 100% the truth. It's about finding statistical evidence for certain activities that are repeatable, which you can scale and you can expect to profit from. I think that, like, just as a disclaimer, no one at Dreamdata would ever say that we're going to tell you 100% of the truth. And I think that's when people bash attribution on LinkedIn, for example. It's because they think like we're like obsessed people that don't see any nuances in the world. We do. We actually, what we talk about is just, it's a game of competitive advantage. And if you know more than your competition about your customer journeys, the likelihood of you winning, no, we're never going to tell you 100% of the truth. But if we can make you go from, say, 10, 20% to 50, 60%, your likelihood of success is going to go up. So kind of that's my background for this whole interest of why you should be interested in customer journeys. And then take a breath of air. But then to the second part of your question, Barry, what is it that you want to map then? And essentially, you want to map anything that touches the account that is mappable, you can say. So typically, most B2Bs would have a CRM system that contains calls, that contains mails, etc., going out towards specific people at specific companies. Then you would also have a marketing automation tool. You maybe have a customer success tool, maybe even an outreach software. That all of these places, people from your company is actually engaging with accounts. So what we do is that we pull out all of this historical data out of the platforms into Dreamdata, and then we organize all the touches into a timeline. Now, this timeline might contain 4 different people that do something with the account, but it's all part of the same account, which is why I started out by saying that you have to kind of almost religiously commit to that there's something called an account timeline and not just a lead or an individual timeline, which is typically where the attribution gets very wrong if you do lead-based, individual-based attribution in B2B. And then, yes, I would say then the last 2 components just mentioning before I'll let you talk, Barry, is we also then do provide a script that you put on your website that tracks every single page view, every single session, every single user, and join that into the account timeline as well. So when you have activity on your website, where is it coming from? What is it doing on the website? Does the same user return repeatedly, and so forth? And then the last component, just before stopping, we also pull in all the data from all the ad platforms you use. So you can compare cost to the deals you win, which that gives you that accountability for revenue, but also transparency to what activities builds revenue. That was a long story.
Yeah, it was a short question, but deserved a long answer. So there's a few things that caught my attention. So one, to summarize, I guess in one sentence, it's important to first identify everywhere where your users could have seen your website or your branding, and then have that connected to technology. Like, those pieces still have to be tracked, maybe siloed, but they have to be tracked whether you're using your platform or not using your platform. The other thing I thought was interesting was that there's a lot of times we talk about lead attribution in marketing. And here we also talked about account attribution. I don't know if that was your language, but not just looking at the lead, seeing how many times they saw LinkedIn ad and how many times that they went to your website, but also looking at their other people at their company, whether it be a champion, whether it be a IT person that's looking for security, whether it be anybody else, an executive. It's important to see the bigger picture, to see who needs to be involved earlier in the process, later in the process, so that you can predict revenue also. So is there scoring with this that helps is that another way that people can be using revenue attribution?
So we've not built it into, you can say, our application, but we're actually just about releasing now some content analytics stuff that will tell you which pages are viewed when people buy and which pages are not viewed. So you can work your way back from when you win deals, they look at these pages. We can also look at the opposite way and then say when they start journeys, they're viewing these pages. So with that, you could build some really strong lead scoring. For example, what we found was that a lot of people who buy looks at integrations, but more funnily, what we also found out that those who buy, they very typically hit a 404 page on the website, which means that you're really digging around to find a 404 page on our website, but that is easily a sign that somebody's actually doing proper research. What we also confirmed was that we have an upgrade button inside of the product. If they click that, it actually correlates with them ending up buying. And then the last two I just want to mention is that we can see the about page always gets checked. And we have our community page, which also often gets checked. So all of these things, are stuff that are important in the buyer journey, and you can do lead scoring on it, but you can also consider whether you should make those pages better or make more content like those pages. So it's a really good thought, Barry, that you could actually do some proper lead scoring on this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's hilarious, the 404 example. And I also love that you're kind of doing a how Dreamdata uses Dreamdata session. The 404 thing I think is really funny because usually marketers are embarrassed about 404, but it's your weird indicator that people are curious and that they're looking for it, and I love that.
Yeah. I haven't looked at the other accounts yet, but at least for me, it kind of makes sense because you have to struggle to find a 404 page on our website. And if you do find it, that means you've invested significant time in our company.
Right. Yeah, no, logically it makes sense. It's just a hilarious indicator. Like we want people to find the 404. So that's awesome. So maybe you could tell me, if we're doing the Dreamdata on Dreamdata kind of story, maybe you could tell me some more of the customer journey, the mappings, the different touch points, so that, excuse me, so that if our listeners want to expand the touch points, what are some of those touch points and what is the siloed data that's tracking it? Let me rephrase that. What's the platform? Like if I understand correctly, Dreamdata helps creates its own data, but also aggregates data from siloed platforms. So when I'm referring to the touch points, what's the technology that is capturing that, even if it's siloed? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of questions. Let me start. So essentially, Dreamdata is a data warehouse to which you connect all the tools that you use. So the data lives inside of Dreamdata. We then, so that's the data layer. And then on top of this, we have our own application that would typically answer 80% of questions that B2B marketers would have. But the data is also open and accessible, so you can connect whatever tool that connects with Google BigQuery and Snowflake and Amazon Redshift to the Dreamdata. So we take all of this data you have available and then extract it and clean it up and put it into nice tables, so it's very easy to use for BI people. That you could put back into your CRM system, so you could have a original source field, and then you can have the Dreamdata source field as well to compare what is actually true. You could put it into ad platforms. So you would inform Google, Facebook, LinkedIn about who are actually the accounts that go very far down your pipeline. You could build lead scoring models on top of it, etc. So the foundation is the data model that contains every single touch of every account. So we do all that heavy lifting of that data cleansing for you. Now, what was the first part of your question?
Yeah, so thank you for explaining and going into details. So now let's go into the more details and find out actually how your company uses your what data and touch points you're actually taking before you're collecting them into your data warehouse.
So that's typically what I use the most as you can say a marketer is information about activities that I can repeat, activities that consistently start journeys. So an example for this could be like Google search ads. If people are typing a specific thing, is that correlating with you buying more of our product? Then I would analyze in there where you can see what's the impression share of this keyword, and if it's very low and you're already making money on it, then if you put more money into this keyword, it's most likely going to correlate with your company making more money, because the intent of the keyword it normally stays the same whoever types it in.
Do you have any more examples? Maybe like
yes. So
maybe like I'm kind of curious, just like what top of the funnel things, maybe things off your website, like can you track something which Dave Gerhardt's talking a lot about these days is the dark funnel? Is there a way to track like Slack communities? And again, not necessarily just on your platform, but general for anyone that is doing marketing.
Yeah, so I'll get to the dark social thing afterwards, but just to explain Dreamdata, so we only work with first-party data, which means data you have collected yourself. So typically, people will have to be on your website, or you would have to create the digital touch inside the CRM system for us to map it. So we, in that way, I think the technical term are deterministic. It means that stuff that you can actually measure. So we're not doing guessing attribution. We're only doing trackable attribution. That means this whole dark social thing, the way that you'll measure it is that if they arrive to your website containing a certain UTM, then we could take that into account. If they just arrive to your website with a, dreamdata.io and nothing else in the URL, then we won't track it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So
just the last point I just wanted to tell you a little bit about also is that what we can typically see across all our customers, and that's almost 1,000, is that the known journey time is very often the same length as the research phase where people remain anonymous. So what companies typically are aware about is from that first conversion, as you talked about, like an ebook or a webinar or whatever, that time spent, if that's 6 months for your company, then they typically spend 6 months as anonymous on your website before doing any conversion. And that's where we can see like channels like social and all these kind of Slack channels, etc., are representing a lot of research arriving at your website, but they're not reaching out to talk to you because timing is wrong and they don't have the budget, etc.
So let me get that straight. If someone's anonymous for 6 months and they actually buy your product, they'll probably take them another 6 months when they're not anonymous. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That's aggregated data or Dreamdata, like for your company?
No, this is across all accounts, which also I think as a marketer, it's extremely interesting because if you want to contribute to hitting budget in 2022, you most likely have to start now because the journey is going to be super long. It also matters a lot when you're judging your experiments, because if the journey is twice as long as you expect it to be, then you might shut down stuff that is actually working just because you don't have transparency into how long it actually takes to become a sales qualified lead in your company.
Yep, absolutely. Excuse me. So this is a very specific revenue attribution question, but let's go into the weeds. So LinkedIn is a popular B2B kind of way to attract and get leads. People swear by LinkedIn ads.
Mm.
Some people really don't like them, but a lot of people do like them in the B2B. And there's been LinkedIn definitely promotes this, that sometimes if you even if someone doesn't click on your LinkedIn ad, they'll still go to your website because of the brand impression. Or if someone clicked on it once, they'll go to your website maybe 2 months later. Is there anything that as marketers we can do about that in regards to understanding LinkedIn attribution a bit better?
Yeah, it's really good. So first of all, at Dreamdata, we both do very, I don't know if you didn't accept my friend request yet, Barry, but we do a ton of social selling on LinkedIn.
It was personal.
I thought so. And then we actually also run quite a bit of LinkedIn ads as well. And so I'll tell you about a recent experiment I did where I created an audience of 5,000 matched accounts on LinkedIn that fits pretty much our ideal customer profile. And what we can see there is that, these guys get a video where I just set it to the optimization to reach as many of these people as possible. I don't care anything about any conversion. And then these guys are also getting a conversation ad, which is more intended to collect their email. And I'm also just exposing them to a lot of images, like nice brand images. And I can't prove that we've seen a really big uplift in organic and really big uplift in direct. But we can also see that the ad group itself is actually, it's close to break even or so. But it's been the only major difference I've done in our, of our inbound setup, and we've still seen an uplift in direct and in organic. And I think that's where, as an experienced marketer, you need to use, both the data but also your gut feeling. Does it make sense that I've picked 5,000 accounts where I run ads towards the marketers of these 5,000 accounts? Yes, it does make sense that I continue to feed them this message. And I should trust that it's the right thing. As the Chris Walkers of this world would say, you need to generate demand. So I've picked a group of the right people who I'm exposing a message to, and I have no need except from at least having somewhat of a proof that it breaks even. Then I know the rest of it is still valuable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like it is hard to track some of that, but
definitely.
So because it's hard to track, you do break even, and then the rest is gravy. You know that as a marketer, there's intuition that it's working. It might be harder to show that to prove that to the CEO, and that's why you try to make the break even point on some of those points. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's also like qualitatively, just sharing inside of your team how often you hear people mentioning that you're doing social selling on LinkedIn. And it's so much for us nowadays that people say, I've been following your post for like 6 months before I booked the demo. And from an attribution point of view, you don't get any like proof that is true, but you listen to the customer who says it. And then it the way to think about the attribution tool is that it's complementary to, your gut feeling, etc.
No, I love that, because I think it's, especially coming from hearing it from you, to hear that people still in marketing have to go with your gut. You still you can't everything.
Yeah.
You can't and even if you could track everything, everything that's tracked, even if you track everything trackable 100%, there's still a lot of missing there.
Yeah.
And that's where the gut,
exactly.
And that's where you have to also do your own sales, the executive team and things like that.
But it's just to stay on that point a little bit, because an attribution tool doesn't measure everything, but there are stuff that are repeatable, trustworthy things that an attribution tool can tell you. For example, the Google search ads. Every click on Google arrives to your website with a click ID. And if this click ID is consistently present in journeys you win, well, then it's probably reasonable to scale the spend on that campaign that generates these click IDs. No, it's not catching a conversation at a conference or like in a very niche community. But this thing you can put more money into and you can expect to profit from it.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. So let's bring this back to more the RevOps people that are listening,
Yeah.
the professionals. So definitely revenue attribution is interesting for marketing. I'm sure there's a way to make it very relevant for sales and SDR team.
Yeah.
I'm sure companies can increase the value of their sale by knowing which decision makers to make interesting patterns. So what's the RevOps role in this? I guess it'd be the marketing ops person would be in charge of this data, or is it ever a RevOps person that's in charge of this data? Someone that is looking at things more holistically? Who usually is involved in?
Good question. So first of all, our own salespeople use the product every day. And the way that they use it is that whenever they go into a meeting, they would check the customer journey and see what is kind of in the content that this account has consumed. So they're not sitting blindfolded at a demo call. It could also be that they haven't heard from an account lately, and suddenly that they see that that account had an activity somewhere, either on the website or downloaded an ebook or something. So they would know what to reach out with again when they wanted to activate the account. Our typical, just quite typically kind of a buying triangle or something like that. There's the marketers who's going to use the product every day. They have some kind of VP-ish person who will sign off on the budget and wants to know where to put the budget. And then there's ops and data people who kind of validates that we're not just bullshitting our way in our demos, but actually can validate, oh, the data is getting pulled from all the right sources and it seems to be mapped correctly. So you can actually trust this data is true. I think where the ops people gets a big relief is that they don't have to answer these 100 questions that marketers have every day to all parts of the customer journey and campaigns, etc. They have a platform where they can point people to where they know that they can trust that data gets in there, it gets sorted correctly, and then they can use the Dreamdata application to just do all the queries that they might have. So the ops people is typically relieved from a lot of work that can be very time consuming to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And then do you see more marketing ops people or revenue ops people?
That for us it's more good. I think it's more marketing ops. I don't know if it's just me, but this rep ops seem very geared towards the salespeople, and they tend to be less interested in the earlier parts of the journey. Whereas we win these deals, the reps did this, they had this many calls, etc. So I would say ops people who are interested in the full journey and not just the last mile.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's interesting. I mean, RevOps changing every few months, something's changing. So it's pretty interesting in that sense.
I mean, overall, a company can only spend its money one time, and I think the whole purpose is that we're trying to show them where you can invest the money most effectively, whether that is into a more sales reps or if it's customer success people or if it's ads. We just want to help you allocate the money you have most effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go, I want to take advantage of this time. You have a lot of data on your platform. Is there any data that you can share with us, like buying patterns, average sales cycle? I'm trying to think of some cool things like average amount of touch points for typical B2B companies selling in, let's say, an average contract value between around 25 grand.
So it's funny you're saying it, Barry, because we've actually been debating on we should start to do some quarterly reports on these things.
You have to.
Yeah, it's true because we know from every company size to every deal size the length of the journey, what's the best first touch channel, etc. There's not a lot of things I can I can show, but I'll take it as a reminder to keep pushing on this, releasing the information. But the one thing I did say, which people can take with them, is that the known sales cycle is typically 1x the anonymous time or research time, or what you want to say, which matters immensely if you want to actually drive revenue.
Yep. Absolutely. No, it's interesting data, and you definitely. I'm looking forward to, maybe we'll do next season a report on that data. I think that'd be super cool. And if you need me to convince someone on your team that they should involve themselves in that, let me know.
I can typically sort of the organic and the paid channels are typically contributing anywhere between 3 and 7 times in a first touch model than they are in a last touch model, which means that the marketers are probably a lot of times spending less money than they should. Like if you could spend 7x the amount of money on ads, your company would be growing extremely faster than what it is. And these are some of the aspects that people typically find, because the journey is now account-based. That means that one person can start the journey, a Q&A can take over, and then they have a boss who signs the contracts. When we put all of that into the same timeline, then the research gets connected with the revenue you produce, and then you can see which activities you should do more of.
Yeah, no, I think I definitely get from a marketer's point of view, I think it's golden. And from a RevOps perspective, just from A to Z is nice to see. Excuse me. So Steffen, thank you so much for joining our podcast. I learned a lot about marketing attribution. I'm sure our listeners did also. If someone has any questions or wants to follow up, where's the best place to do that?
My cop says, add me on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
So they're very welcome to
that was convenient.
Yeah.
So I won't ask you any more questions, so that just in case you don't have any more cops that have the answer. So thanks for joining, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much for the invite, Barry. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Bye now.